Right now, in late June, every hydrangea, rose, butterfly bush, Forsythia, Weigela, and Boxwood in your yard is producing the one type of growth that roots faster and easier than any other. Softwood. The new stems that grew this season, still green, still flexible, not yet hardened into rigid brown wood. In 2 weeks, that growth hardens and the window closes until next June. But if you cut 6 inches off the tip of that stem today, strip the lower leaves, stick it in a pot of damp sand, and leave it alone for 8 weeks, you have a free plant, identical to the parent it came from. No nursery trip, no $15 price tag, no guessing what variety it is. The same plant, cloned, for the cost of a 4-inch pot and a handful of sand. Take 10 cuttings today, and by September you have 10 new plants. Take 50 and you have a hedge. I have filled entire borders this way without spending a dollar, and I'm going to show you exactly how. There is one 30-second step in this process that most people skip entirely, and it is the difference between half your cuttings rooting and nearly all of them rooting. I will show you that step when we get to the method. I have been propagating shrubs from cuttings for over 25 years. The first few years I did it wrong, badly wrong. I took cuttings in August when the wood had already hardened. I stuck them in potting soil that stayed so wet the stems turned to mush within a week. I skipped steps I did not know mattered and then blamed the plant when nothing rooted. I lost dozens of cuttings to rot and desiccation before I finally sat down with an old extension service bulletin and understood the biology behind why some cuttings root and others just sit there and slowly die. What I am going to walk you through today is the version that works. The method I have refined over 2 decades and used to produce hundreds of plants from shrubs already growing in my yard. My neighbor watched me do this 3 summers ago with a single hydrangea. She thought I was wasting my time. Last spring, she asked me to show her how, because those cuttings I took are now full-size plants lining my back fence, and she wants the same thing along hers. If you know someone who spends money every year on shrubs they could be growing for free, pass this along to them. The information does not expire. The technique is the same one gardeners have used for centuries. Here is what we are going to cover. First, what softwood actually is and why it matters that you act this week and not next month. Then, the 6 best shrubs to propagate right now, starting with the one that succeeds 90% of the time, even if you've never taken a cutting in your life. Then, the exact step-by-step method, all 6 steps, including that one step most people skip that nearly doubles the success rate. And at the end, I'm going to show you the math, what 10 cuttings or 50 cuttings actually translates to in dollars saved and garden built. But the most expensive plant on this list to buy at a nursery, the one that makes this technique pay for itself 10 times over, I am saving for last. Let me explain the biology first, because once you understand why softwood works, the entire method makes sense and you will never forget it. Plants produce 3 types of stem growth through the course of a season. Softwood comes first, in late spring and early summer. These are the stems that grew this year. They are green. They are flexible. If you bend one sharply between your fingers, it snaps cleanly with a crisp break. That clean snap is your test. Walk outside right now and try it on any new growth on your hydrangea or forsythia. If it snaps like a fresh green bean, you are in the softwood window. If it bends without breaking, it is too young, too soft, not enough cellular structure to survive on its own. If it does not snap at all and just kind of crushes or splinters, it has already hardened into semi-hardwood and the window has passed for that stem. Semi-hardwood arrives in mid to late summer. The stems are firmer, starting to turn brown at the base, still slightly green near the tip. Hardwood comes in fall and winter. Rigid, brown, fully woody. You can propagate from all 3 types. But softwood roots, the cells in a softwood stem, are actively dividing. They are full of auxins, the natural growth hormones that drive root formation. Think of auxins as the chemical signal that tells plant cells to become roots instead of leaves or bark. A softwood cutting is saturated with that signal. A hardwood cutting has almost none. That is why a softwood cutting can produce roots in 3 to 6 weeks, while the same plant, taken as a hardwood cutting in November, might take 4 to 6 months. Or it might just sit there and rot. Late June is the peak of the softwood window for most deciduous shrubs in zones 5 through 8. The stems are long enough to cut, mature enough to survive being separated from the parent, and young enough to root eagerly. 2 weeks from now, much of that growth begins to harden. The cells slow their division. The auxin levels drop. The window does not slam shut overnight, but it narrows fast, and by mid-July, many of these stems are already transitioning into semi-hardwood territory, where rooting takes twice as long and fails twice as often. Now that you understand why softwood roots, here are the 6 plants in your yard right now that are easiest to propagate, starting with the one that succeeds 90% of the time, even if you have never taken a cutting in your life. Plant number 1 is Hydrangea. This is the easiest shrub on the planet to root from softwood cuttings, 80 to 90% success rate, and that number holds even for complete beginners. Big leaf hydrangea, panicle hydrangea, oak leaf hydrangea, smooth hydrangea, they all root willingly from softwood. The key with hydrangea is choosing the right stem. You want a vegetative shoot, one that did not produce a flower bud at the tip this year. These are the stems growing lower on the plant or in the interior, pushing out fresh green growth but no bloom. When you take a cutting from a non-flowering stem, the plant puts all its energy into root production instead of trying to finish a bloom cycle. 6 inches from the tip, 2 to 3 leaves left at the top, and that cutting will have roots in 3 to 4 weeks. I took 12 hydrangea cuttings 2 summers ago from a single endless summer plant. 11 of them rooted. Those 11 plants are now growing in a row along the east side of my property, each one producing blooms in that same blue-pink color range as the parent. 11 plants that would have cost me over $150 at the garden center from one afternoon with a pair of shears and a bag of sand. Plant number 2 is roses. This works on all types: hybrid tea, floribunda, shrub roses, climbing roses. The timing with roses is slightly different, because you take cuttings from stems that just finish flowering. The wood directly below a spent bloom is at the perfect softwood stage. The bloom exhausted the terminal growth, but the stem below it is still green, still full of those auxins, still in that metabolic sweet spot. Remove the spent flower and the top inch of stem. That leaves you a 5 to 6 inch cutting with 3 to 4 leaf nodes along its length. Rose cuttings root a bit more slowly than hydrangea, typically 4 to 6 weeks, and the success rate is lower, around 60 to 70%. But 60% of 10 cuttings is still 6 free rose bushes. A friend of mine propagated her grandmother's climbing rose this way, a variety that is no longer sold commercially. The original plant has been growing on a wooden trellis beside her mother's back door for over 40 years. That rose now grows on 3 different properties in our neighborhood, all from cuttings taken from the original plant. You cannot buy that at a nursery. You can only grow it. That is your first 2 plants covered, and between them you already have the technique for the 2 most popular ornamental shrubs in American gardens: hydrangeas for shade borders and foundation plantings, roses for sunny beds and fences. 2 plants, 2 slightly different approaches, both rooting in under 6 weeks. What comes next roots even faster. Plant number 3 is butterfly bush. Budlar roots so easily from cuttings that it borders on invasive in some regions, and honestly that tells you everything you need about how willing this plant is to make roots from a cut stem. 4-inch tip cuttings root in 2 to 3 weeks. The stems are vigorous, the growth hormones are abundant, and the plant simply wants to reproduce. Each mature butterfly bush grows 6 to 8 feet tall and wide in zones 5 through 9, produces those long purple, pink, or white flower spikes from July through September, and attracts every butterfly and hummingbird in the neighborhood. You can create a privacy screen of butterfly bushes from a single parent plant in one season. I did exactly that along the west side of my property 4 years ago. Took 20 cuttings in late June, 18 of them rooted, and by the following summer I had a 6-foot-tall wall of purple bloom that the monarchs found before I did. Everything so far roots in 3 to 6 weeks. The success rates are high, the plants are forgiving, and even if you have never done this before, you are going to get results. But the next 3 plants are where the real value is. These are the shrubs where propagation stops being a fun garden project and starts being a serious money-saving strategy, especially the last one, which costs more per foot at the nursery than almost any other hedging shrub in America. Plant number 4 is Forsythia, the spring bloomer everyone recognizes, those arching branches covered in bright yellow flowers in March and April before the leaves even emerge. Forsythia is one of those shrubs that seems to exist in every older neighborhood, and for good reason. It is practically indestructible, thriving in zones 3 through 8 in full sun to partial shade, reaching 8 to 10 feet tall and wide at maturity, with almost no care. Softwood cuttings taken now, in late June, root readily in damp sand. The cuttings want to root. By next March, you have small plants that will bloom in their second spring. And here is the thing, one Forsythia bush can produce 100 cuttings without any visible impact on the parent plant. The growth is so vigorous, so abundant, that removing 100 stem tips is like giving the bush a light trim. It barely notices. I have a neighbor who wanted a Forsythia hedge along her entire back property line, 60 feet. At nursery prices, 3-gallon Forsythia plants run about $20 to $25 each, spaced 3 feet apart. That is 20 plants. $400 to $500 for a row of Forsythia. She took cuttings from her one existing Forsythia, rooted them in sand on her back porch, and had the whole hedge planted by the following spring. Total cost was the pots and the sand. Maybe $15. Plant number 5 is Weigela, a beautiful arching shrub with pink or red trumpet-shaped flowers that bloom in May and June, growing 4 to 6 feet tall and wide in zones 4 through 8. The flowers are small trumpets, clustered along the branches in dense groups, and when they are in full bloom, the entire shrub looks like it has been draped in color. Weigela roots well from softwood cuttings with a success rate of about 70%. The one thing to know about Weigela is that it has wider node spacing than most of the other shrubs on this list, so you need slightly longer cuttings, 8 inches instead of 6. That extra length gives you enough nodes below the soil line for root development and enough above for leaf retention. Weigela attracts hummingbirds like nothing else I grow. I have a wine and roses variety with deep burgundy foliage and hot pink flowers that I have propagated 4 times now. The cuttings produce plants identical to the parent. Same dark leaves, same vivid flowers, same arching habit, every one of them. Now, plant number 6 is boxwood. I saved this one for last deliberately. Boxwood is the classic hedging shrub, the one you see framing front doors and bordering formal gardens and edging walkways in every historic neighborhood in the country. It is slow-growing, evergreen and dense, reaching 2 to 4 feet tall depending on the variety, thriving in zones 5 through 8 in full sun to partial shade. A single mature boxwood in a 3-gallon pot costs $15 to $25 at most nurseries. A 5-gallon specimen runs $30 to $45, and a formal boxwood hedge requires plants spaced 12 to 18 inches apart. Do that math on a 40-foot hedge, and you are looking at $300 to over $1,000 depending on the size you buy. Boxwood roots reliably from 4-inch softwood cuttings taken right now. A single mature boxwood 4 or 5 feet tall can supply enough cuttings to create an entire formal hedge, and you would barely see where you cut. It takes longer to root than the others on this list, 6 to 8 weeks, and the cuttings are smaller, so the resulting plants grow more slowly in their first year. But the success rate is high, 75 to 85% in my experience, and every single cutting that roots is a plant that would have cost you $20 or more. That is the loop I opened at the beginning, the most expensive shrub on this list to buy, and the one that saves you the most money when you propagate it yourself. That covers all 6 plants. You know what to cut and which shrubs to cut it from. Now I want to walk you through the exact method, step by step. 6 steps. Each one matters, and skipping any of them drops your success rate significantly. Step 1. Select and cut. Choose healthy stems with no disease spots, no insect damage, and no flower buds at the tip. You want clean, vigorous vegetative growth. Cut 6 inches from the tip of the stem, 8 inches for Weigela, using sharp, clean pruning shears. Make the cut just below a leaf node, that is the bump or slight swelling where a leaf attaches to the stem. Roots emerge from nodes, not from random points along the stem. Cutting just below a node puts that growth point at the very base of your cutting, right where you want roots to form. Do your cutting in the early morning when the plant is fully hydrated from the overnight hours. A cutting taken at 2 in the afternoon on a hot day is already stressed before you even put it in the pot. Step 2. Strip the lower leaves. Remove all leaves from the bottom 2/3 of the cutting. Leave only the top 2 or 3 leaves. Every leaf you leave on the cutting loses moisture through transpiration, water evaporating through the leaf surface. Too many leaves, and the cutting dries out before roots can form because there are no roots yet to replace that lost moisture. Too few leaves, and there is no photosynthesis happening to fuel root growth. 2 to 3 leaves at the top is the balance. Enough to generate energy, few enough to prevent fatal moisture loss. Step 3. This is the step most people skip, and it's the one that separates a 50% success rate from an 80% success rate. Wounds the base. Take a clean knife or even your thumbnail and scrape a thin strip of outer bark off one side of the bottom inch of the stem. You are exposing the green cambium layer underneath, that thin layer of actively growing tissue just below the bark surface. This wound does two things. It exposes more cambium cells to the rooting medium, and it triggers the plant to produce callus tissue at the wound site. Callus tissue is the undifferentiated growth that precedes root formation. More callus means more roots, faster. After wounding, dip the cut end in rooting hormone powder. This is optional but worth it. Rooting hormone contains synthetic auxins that supplement the natural auxins already present in the softwood. In my experience, it increases success rate by about 20%, which on a batch of 20 cuttings means the difference between 12 plants and 16 plants. Tap off the excess powder after dipping. You want a light coating, not a thick clump. Step 4. Stick the cutting in your medium. Fill a 4-inch pot with a 50-50 mix of coarse sand and perlite. No potting soil, no compost, no garden soil. The medium must drain almost instantly and hold very little moisture. Wet, dense, medium rots cuttings before they ever produce roots. This is where most beginners fail. They use regular potting mix because it is what they have, and the cutting sits in moisture and turns brown from the bottom up within 10 days. Coarse sand and perlite. Nothing else. Poke a hole in the medium with a pencil or a chopstick. Insert the cutting about 2 inches deep and firm the sand gently around the stem. You can fit 3 to 4 cuttings in a single 4-inch pot. Water once to settle the medium around the stems. Step 5. Create humidity. Cover the pot with a clear plastic bag supported by 2 wooden sticks or chopsticks pushed into the sand so the bag does not rest on the leaves. This creates a miniature greenhouse. The humidity inside the bag stays high, reducing moisture loss through the remaining leaves, while the cutting below has no roots yet and cannot draw water from the medium. That humidity is what keeps the cutting alive during the weeks between cutting and rooting. Without it, those 2 or 3 remaining leaves lose water faster than the stem can absorb it, and the cutting wilts and dies. Place the pot in bright, indirect light, never direct sun. Direct sun inside a plastic bag creates temperatures that will cook the cutting in hours. A north-facing window, a covered porch, or dappled shade under a tree canopy are all ideal. Step 6. Wait and check. Mist inside the bag every 3 to 4 days if the condensation on the plastic disappears. Do not overwater the sand. It should feel barely damp when you touch the surface, never soggy. After 3 weeks, give one cutting a very gentle tug. If you feel resistance, like the cutting is anchored, roots are forming, leave it alone and check again in another week. After 6 weeks, most cuttings will have a visible root system when you gently tip them out of the pot. Remove the plastic bag gradually over 3 to 4 days to harden off the cutting. Pulling the bag off all at once shocks a plant that has been growing in near 100% humidity. Open the bag on day 1, remove it halfway on day 2, fully off on day 3 or 4. Then pot up into regular potting soil and let it grow through the rest of summer. Plant it in the garden in early fall or the following spring. You now know exactly how to do this. You know the biology, the 6 best plants, and every step of the method. But I have not shown you the numbers yet, what 10 cuttings or 50 cuttings actually translates to in dollars and in garden built. This is the part that changes how you look at every shrub you own. One hydrangea plant at the garden center costs $12 to $18. 10 cuttings from your own hydrangea cost you nothing and produce 10 identical plants in 8 weeks. 10 plants at $15 each is $150 of nursery stock from one afternoon of cutting. Look, that Forsythia hedge I mentioned earlier. 60 feet of Forsythia at nursery prices runs $400 to $500. The same hedge from cuttings taken from one existing bush costs the price of pots and a bag of coarse sand, maybe $15 in materials. And that boxwood hedge, a 40-foot formal boxwood border at nursery prices, can easily exceed $1,000. From cuttings, you spend a fraction of that, plus 8 weeks of patience, and you get identical plants with the same genetics, same growth habit, same leaf density as the parent. Every established shrub in your yard is a free nursery. Every hydrangea, every rose, every forsythia, every boxwood. They are not just landscape plants, they are inventory. You have been buying what you could have been growing. A woman I know down the road realized this about 3 years ago. She had one mature limelight hydrangea in her backyard. She took cuttings every June for 3 consecutive years. She now has 17 limelight hydrangeas across her property, including a row of 8 lining her driveway that bloom in those enormous white panicles from July through September, gradually blushing to pink as fall arrives. At nursery prices, those 17 plants would have cost her over $250. She spent nothing but time and attention on late June mornings. Late June. Softwood window, 6 inches from the tip. Strip the lower leaves, wound the base, stick in sand, bag it, and wait. 8 weeks from today, you have free plants. Take 10 cuttings this weekend. Even if half of them fail, you still have 5 free plants that would have cost you $75 or more at the nursery. Gardeners have been doing this for hundreds of years. Your grandmother probably did it without thinking twice. She just called it making new plants from the old one and stuck them in a coffee can full of sand on the back porch. Same technique, same results. Same softwood window opening up right now in late June. When I said at the beginning of this that you could take 10 cuttings today and have 10 new plants by September, that probably sounded like a stretch. It is not. It is just what softwood does when you give it the right conditions. The cells divide, the callus forms, the roots push out into the sand, and 8 weeks later, you have a plant that is genetically identical to its parent, rooted, growing, and ready for the garden. The only thing between you and a yard full of free shrubs is a pair of clean shears and a pot of damp sand. Which shrub are you going to propagate first, and how many cuttings are you going to take? Tell me in the comments. The people who say 50 are my kind of gardener. I will see you next week. There is more I want to show you.